Welcome to Brave. Be inspired by the best leaders of Southeast Asia tech. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. I'm Jeremy Au, a VC, founder, and father. Join us for transcripts, analysis, and community at www.jeremyau.com. Hey, Anita, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Excited to be here.
I'm so excited to share your journey because you've not only obviously been a great head of knowledge at First Round Capital, that's, the start of your tech journey, but also you've been a great coach that I've personally known, and both as an individual coach as well as a founder of a coaching community as well called The Grand. And so it's just been interesting to see a transition from VC to coach to founder and coach, I guess. So excited to see and explore that.
Yeah, and you've kind of seen me through all those transitions. So I'm excited to chat with you more about it today.
Yeah, so for those who don't know you yet, how would you introduce yourself professionally?
Yeah, so I would say that the two main pillars of my life, the things that you need to know about me, is that storytelling and community are a big part of who I am. And so when I think back to my personal and professional experiences, it started when I was a kid growing up in Wisconsin. My family's from Bangladesh, and the way that they really cultivated the sense of community is we would travel around the country performing Bengali plays. And for us, it was a way for us to tell our stories, but also connect with a group of people, other Bangladeshis in America, and create a sense of community when my parents were so far from home. And so I think that really instilled something in me, and I carried that throughout not only my personal life, but also my professional life. And so after college, I worked in finance, and I noticed that women VP level and below were leaving at a higher rate than their counterparts. And so I created a community for them to share their learnings, just understand the senior managers across the firm. And this created a lot of career mobility. And then after that, I decided to take a leap and pursue acting for a little bit, which we could talk about later. And then I went to business school. And while I was at business school, I created a platform called Storytellers, which allowed people to get out of what I call real-time talk. And so I don't know if you experienced this at business school, but 800 people per class, everyone would just go to the default of, how was that test yesterday? How was that party last night? What are you doing this weekend? And so I wanted to create a platform that really helped people get out of that small talk and share who they are, what they value, and really get to know each other. And so this started as something small, and it grew to become the largest organization on campus. And to date, the dean actually talks about it as one of the reasons you should go to Wharton. So that was really cool. And then I was at a crossroads, and I almost moved back to New York because it's one of my favorite cities. But I decided I've never lived in California before. And so I booked one ticket, I packed one suitcase, and I just showed up and decided I would find my next thing there. And that's when I found the role at First Round Capital as the head of knowledge. And yeah, it's such a Silicon Valley title, but I loved it. And what it meant is I worked with all of our portfolio companies, really helped understood what challenges they were facing, and I would design learning experiences so that they can share knowledge with each other. And through that work, I actually met my co-founder, Ray, and I'll tell you more about how we started the Grand specifically. But I was also became an executive coach through Reboot. And so I was working one-on-one with a lot of individual entrepreneurs and founders. And while at First Round, I was organizing peer groups of founders so that they can, again, learn from each other. And what I noticed there is that everyone went in with this feeling of, okay, I need to share how things are going well. I'm crushing it. Things are awesome. And I really wanted to push them to share what was hard, what is their self-identity, self-worth, and are they feeling like they're good enough in that role? And that's when things transformed, and people would stay for 4 or 5 hours really talking through all of these topics. And I saw the magic and the power of this. And Ray and I decided, what would it look like for us to build a platform where it's not just for founders and entrepreneurs, it's for people of all different ages, all different geographies, backgrounds, industries, where they can come together and get that level of peer support when they need it most. So that's really how the Grand was born. And our thesis around when people need it most is when you're going through transition and you feel like you don't have anyone to talk to. And so that's a little bit about my journey and how I started the Grand and became a founder today.
Yeah, what a journey. Talking about transitions here, you've made quite a few in your career. And I got to ask, how did you make that transition into the technology world? Because you had experience, obviously, in the banking world, which is very straightforward. And you did a solid 6 years there. So,
Yeah.
you could have kept going, kept climbing, that assistant VP level. And it's a nice job, especially in New York. So how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so I was feeling like it was time to make a transition when I noticed within myself two things. One, I wasn't able to be as creative as I wanted to be day to day. And two, I couldn't really see the impact that I was making. Obviously, I stayed there for a long time. And the reason I did is because I had those things in the beginning. I somehow finagled my way into a Latin American team doing business in Spanish. I was the only non-native Spanish speaker. It was really hard. I double majored in Spanish in college, or minored in Spanish in college. And it was still very, very challenging. I stayed there for a while, but after I lost that impact and that creativity, I decided it's time for a change. And so naturally, I went to business school, as some people do. For me, what I found is that I really, really wanted to work in something where I can marry my interest in storytelling and social impact. And these are two things that there are a lot of roles that could fulfill that, and there's no straightforward path. What I did is I used business school as a way to explore those things that I was interested in. And I called that theme of my life following my curiosity. And that's kind of what I've done, throughout. And so when I moved to California, I ended up deciding that, okay, I wasn't necessarily looking at venture and I wasn't looking at startups. But when I read the job description, I said, okay, they're describing me right now. And what I loved about it, it was extremely entrepreneurial. It was really creative. And I worked with some of the smartest, kindest people that I have ever met. And so I think with all of that, I just took a leap of faith. They took a leap of faith for me. And I think it definitely married my interests because at the end of the day, I helped our founders with self-discovery. I helped them become more resilient in their roles, and I helped just create a more open and vulnerable ecosystem, which is what we need in venture and in startups.
Yeah, amazing. So you said this interesting phrase is that, you took the time at business school to explore yourself. So, there's a lot of people who are thinking about using business school as a way to get a sabbatical or to do a transition. What do you think about that? Should people just save themselves $250,000 and use that to spend it on a retreat or something? Or I guess which situations do you think makes more sense versus those that make less sense?
Yeah, my thought there is you should only go to business school if you know exactly what you're going to use that platform for. And so I don't mean you need to know exactly, I'm coming from finance and I want to be a consultant. You don't have to know that for sure, but you need to be very clear on how you're going to use the experience. And so what I mean by that is when you go to business school, it is overwhelming because there's so many things that you can get involved in. And what happens is when everyone else is lining up for a particular door, you also line up for that door because you're like, oh, everyone else is lining up for it. If the door is consulting or finance or whatever, you line up for it because it's easy to get swept up into it. If you don't have a clear sense of, okay, what is it that I want? What do I want to focus on? It's easy to get caught up in it. And so for me, what I was focused on was building out my leadership skills. And so everything that I did was really, how can I develop that? And so I started that storytellers organization that I talked about. I worked on a nonprofit that we founded. So everything was really set up for that. I wanted to develop strong relationships with my classmates, with our professors, and just building out that community was really important to me. And I wanted to use that time for self-discovery to know what really makes me happy and how I can live a more meaningful and more purposeful life. And so that lens helped me say no to certain things and yes to certain things. And so my advice for folks would be, if you're really clear about what it is that you want and you can use business school as a means to get there, great. But I think if you're using it as a break, it's a very expensive break. And I think there are other ways. It doesn't have to be business school. There are other ways that you can get that level of clarity and support.
Yeah, that's totally rhymes with what I think too. I think it's a very expensive way to take a break, but it's a very good way if you know where you're trying to get to, right? Mm-hmm. How did that transition to technology take place in venture capital?
Yeah, so I found out about the role, and I was able to really position myself as someone who's built community. I've built things from nothing. I'm the type of person who loves to create, loves to experiment. And so from that, the background that I have in just all of the things that I've created in my past career, like within finance, those organizations that I talked about, within business school, that entrepreneurial spirit, I think, allowed me to really dive in head first into venture. Frankly, I had to get up to speed, though. It was a little daunting at first. I definitely had my own bouts of imposter syndrome going in. One of the first experiences that I designed was a conversation among CTOs at early stage companies. And Jeremy, I was so nervous. I was like, how am I going to lead a discussion with a group of CTOs? I realized that I needed to guide them. I needed to create and design that safe container where they can share and be their authentic selves so that they can emerge more resilient in their own roles. And that's what my superpower was. I know how to create safe spaces. I know how to get people to share openly. I know how to build community in a very compelling way. And so that allowed me to get over this hump of, I haven't been immersed in technology for 10 years before I joined. And then I would say the other thing is, at the same time, my co-founder, she also started and didn't necessarily have a deep tech background. And we started about a month apart from each other. And so Ray and I really bonded over this. Once we were able to share that openly with each other, we also shared with some of our colleagues, and we designed our own peer support group within the firm of women who worked at First Round. And that really helped us become more confident in our roles.
So you're casting yourself as someone who was an unconventional pick, right? Because you didn't feel qualified for that role, and it was a new role too. Why did First Round Capital say, why Anita? What were they looking for from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I wasn't qualified for the role. I would say I didn't have the traditional background in terms of what I thought they wanted. And so when you think about a venture firm and you look at everyone's path, everyone comes from such a unique place. It's not like a straightforward like engineer or marketer that you could see the steps and it makes sense that they're in that position. And so I would say that for me, what they saw in me, I mean, we can go ask them and get clarity on this. But again, the way I think about First Round is it's a venture firm that acts like a startup. And so you need to be very scrappy. You need to experiment. You need to be really creative. And so I've proven all of those things. And I think that's what they were looking for. And so when you think about breaking into an industry that you don't have experience in, I think a lot of times people do hire for potential. And if you can really show what you're capable of, then the rest is history. So that's what they saw in me.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because you have this duality or this bridge role, right? Because the VC is very much, we're here to invest in companies that will become unicorns. Mm-hmm. And we hope to support the rest as well in that journey. And so we're looking for that net return at the end of the day. And obviously founders are there who are saying, here's the capital, I'm going to grow as fast as I can to go from point A to point B to point Z, right? Within 5 years. It's somewhere in between, right? Because you're not making an investment decision on that, and you're not obviously the operator side, and you're somewhere, holding that space in between. Could you tell us a little bit more about what were the opportunities of that duality or bridge, and what were also some of the shadow side of that role?
Yeah, I would say the opportunity is that I was able to work cross-functionally with every single person at the firm. And so I was really able to understand what they were interested in, how they wanted to support their companies, and I brought that to life. And when I think about the contributions I made, so I thought about my role in three ways. It was one, to help build our brand, two, to really support our companies as much as I could, and three, to find new investment opportunities. And so I did have a hand in all three. I think that what really helped my role and similar roles out there stand apart is that capital is a commodity. You can get money from any firm, but what really sets you apart is how you support each of your founders. And as a founder yourself, you know how challenging that journey is. And so I think that the upside was I was able to build trust with everyone, every founder that I worked with, and really meet them where they're at so that they could do their jobs even better and feel that level of support. And so I think when you think about firms who are investing in their companies in that way, like our investor in the Grand 776, they really, really support their founders in a compelling way. First Round does that as well. Like, so many different firms have seen that this is how we're going to stand apart. So I would say that is the positive side of being in this dual role.
What would you say are some of the shadow or tensions of that role?
I think the tension is there's no clear roadmap. So you define the scope. And so frankly, if I had done the same job that I did the first year, I would probably get bored and I wouldn't succeed. But it was up to me to continue to grow the scope of what I was doing. And again, think really creatively and have a pulse of the community and build with our community to help serve their needs. And so things like our staples at First Round today, things like their Angel Track program, Founder Forum, those are the things that I was able to really focus on. Okay, how do we create more cohort-based support for our community? That to me was really interesting because I was able to constantly learn, understand what our companies needed and how we can help up-level them with the platform support that we provided.
And so there you are, you're helping all these founders through everything. You're creating the role for yourself, adapting it, honestly building out, because nobody has really built out this kind of role in the VC world. And you're helping these founders through their transitions. And there you are, and you start becoming an executive coach with Reboot, which is how I got to know you.
Yeah.
So how did you make the decision to be like, okay, I'm no longer in finance, I'm in VC, and I want to coach? So how does that happen?
Yeah, so the spark that helped that happen was, one, I was coaching without really knowing that I was coaching. So that is how I was serving a lot of our companies. Two, I met Khalid Halim, one of the co-founders of Reboot, because we hosted a session together with some of our portfolio founders on what to look for in a CEO coach, how to structure your sessions for success, and a few other topics. And I was really blown away by him because he was rooted in data and science and psychology, but he also brought this empathetic side, this human side. And I was just wowed. And so were all the founders at his approach. And so we connected and kept in touch. And I asked him more about his journey. And again, going back to stories, it's really helpful to share stories because not only can you make meaning of your own experiences through stories, but you can make real connection with other folks and see yourself in their stories as well. And so he was able to share his journey. And I asked him if I wanted to be a coach one day, what would that look like? And what he would recommend. And he said that I had a really good vantage point because I was working with all these companies already. The best way to do it is to really start And I ended up taking a course in neurolinguistic programming, which you recommended. And then thereafter, I joined as an executive coach with the team, working both at Reboot and First Round, frankly, because both jobs made me better at the other. And it was incredible to have that opportunity.
What's the difference between being a coach versus being a VC, kind of support role, right? What things did you have to change about how you practiced or were present while being with a founder?
Yeah, I do think that the best VCs are coaches. And I will say there's a time and place for that. And so when I think about the difference is sometimes your companies are coming to you and they need guidance and support in the sense of, hey, like everything's burning, everything's on fire. What has another company done in this situation? Or what do you advise me? Because you've been there before. That definitely has a time and place. I think the difference with coaching is when you're really supporting people, you're not doing it to fix or solve their problem. You're actually doing it to help them reveal their inner teacher. And we do this with empathetic listening, with asking open and honest questions, so that ultimately they can understand what is the best path forward for them. And so I think that as any type A leader, it is really hard to shift gears. And we always have this sense that we need to provide the solution. We need to be the person who fixes and solves. It's really hard to shift that mindset. But when you do, that's when you can create profound change. And I'll add, so one quote that we often quote both at Reboot and at the Grand now is that the human soul doesn't want to be advised, fixed, or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, to be seen, acknowledged exactly as it is. And that's from Parker Palmer. I think that just really sums it up.
So Reboot is an interesting space because it's one of the few, I would say, coaching agencies or organizations that obviously at one level is tackling the technology and startup space, especially for founders. But also is one of the few places where coaches are not total freelancers, but also acting as coalition. Tell us more about what made Reboot special from your perspective.
What made it really special is that we focused a lot on radical self-inquiry, which I just mentioned, with asking open and honest questions. We focused on practical skills because at the end of the day, that is what folks need to get to that next level. And then we did acknowledge that peer support is really powerful. And so I think that those three in combination is what made Reboot so thoughtful in their approach. And like you said, because it was a collective or a coalition, we all learned from one another too. So it wasn't like this independent, okay, I'm just going to go off and do my own thing. We had the flexibility and freedom, but we also learned in community with other coaches. And that, I think, really helped us all level up and become better at our craft. Because again, whenever you start something new, it's scary. Like that's the whole premise of why we started the Grand. It's lonely, it's scary, you might not feel good enough. There's a lot of negative self-talk associated with it. And so to be in a place where you feel truly supported and you can be with other people who are in that similar transition, becoming coaches too, I think that's what really set it apart.
And here you are, you're coaching everybody, all these founders. You're working with founders at First Round Capital as well. And somewhere along the way, you're starting to talk to Ray, who's awesome, and you're starting to think and have the founder itch yourself. So what was that like?
Yeah, so I kind of painted the picture of the work I was doing with founders at First Round, and I painted the picture of the one-on-one work I did at Reboot. And what we noticed is that, okay, all of this is for founders and entrepreneurs, and the executive coaching is one-on-one, and it's only for executives. It's only for people, at the top, and it's really cost prohibitive for everyone to get access to it. That got us thinking that it would be really, really powerful for us to support everyone within an organization, because that's truly who needs support to be able to be the better version of themselves. And they're the ones who become the executives ultimately. And so we really connected over that. And also the fact that at this point, loneliness is the greatest health epidemic of our lifetime. And that was the backdrop of when we started thinking about building something together. And as we dug into the research some more, we realized that most Americans don't have a single confidant. That means they don't have a single person to talk to about their dreams, their hopes, their fears. And that really struck us. And so we kept coming back to these two things. We saw the power of our work, we saw this big problem, and ultimately decided that we are the best suited to go out and solve this, and let's do it.
It's interesting because you started doing that. And how did you start building it? What was your first MVP? How did you find out that people wanted that version of the coaching program or approach?
Yeah. So the way we started is we simply put up a Google Sheet on Twitter, and it said, "What's keeping you up at night? If you can get guidance on anything, what topic would it be?" And so we put it up, and we were both watching people fill in responses. And it was incredible to see, again, how honest and raw people were about what was keeping them up. From that list, we stack ranked it and decided to start our first product, which was called Sessions. We brought people together around various topics like, should I have kids or not? Or how do I find the right life partner? How do I make a big career transition? How do I deepen my relationship with my parents? So all these like really deep human topics. And we would gather a group of 10 to 12 folks in people's living rooms. And so it was all in person. We've gathered 400 people at that point, and it was really, really incredible, really powerful, people who would have otherwise never met each other. After we saw this model working for some time, we realized, one, people wanted to get to meet each other more than once, and they wanted to build deeper connections with their groups. And two, they really wanted to go deeper on the topics themselves. It's really hard to cover making a career transition in a 2-hour session and feel really satisfied. It's almost like we were just scratching the surface. And so from that, we realized, okay, what is the next iteration of the Grand? What's that going to look like? And so that's when we introduced our flagship product, the Quest. And so the way the Quest was designed was we brought together a group of 8 to 10 people like yourself, meeting with their group every other week for 2 hours. And you go on this narrative arc, this journey together with the curriculum that we designed. What makes it powerful is that there's a lot of reflection, a lot of self-discovery, and then you're also able to do that for your peers. And so when we say things out loud, we might not be able to connect the dots, but someone in your group, Jeremy, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, Anita, like, here's how I would connect it for you. And those are the aha moments that people had. That's how we started. And we launched in February 2020, and we launched one in San Francisco in person and another group remote. And thank goodness we did, because we obviously, with the pandemic, had to move everything online. And at first, it was really scary. I can share a little bit more about that. But in the end, it was really beneficial to us because we were able to serve a global community. People from all over the world participated in the Grand. To date, we have 20 different countries, 6 different continents. And it made us realize that our topics are universal. And when you bring people from different countries to talk about it, it adds this other level and layer of richness to the conversation.
Yeah, I remember being one of those first customers of the Quest, and I really enjoyed that online digital approach, which, like you said, turned out to be serendipitously helpful.
Yeah.
Obviously, much more accessible to everybody in the group, and I had an absolute blast. So definitely recommend to anybody who's listening to check out the Grand. And what's interesting along the way, of course, is that you built it in a different way, because obviously for most coaching people, they're working as freelancers, or obviously working on cash flow. Even Reboot very much is something that's been very much an agency approach. For yourself, what's interesting is that you've also decided to kind of ramp it up and take on capital from Alexis Ohanian. So, and I always remember him because I used to watch his YouTube show, Small Empires, quite a lot.
Nice.
But it's interesting, right? Because you're choosing to take on this seed capital, right? And so you're kind of also moving beyond it, not just being a founder of a coaching agency, but also pushing towards a more of a startup approach. So talk us a little bit more through about that different approach to the coaching growth trajectory and capital growth requirements.
Yeah. So we wanted to build something that was meaningful and that created real change. And we didn't want to take on money at first until we proved that out. And so for us, it was really important to build with our community instead of building something, presenting it and saying, oh, do people actually want this? And so I think especially because our focus is on group coaching, it's on peer support and community, that was the right approach for us. And once we developed the Grand Quest and we're able to hone it in on, what it is that our product is, and we were able to get an NPS of 90, people were referring their friends and became really strong advocates for us, that's when we knew, okay, we're onto something. This can help so many more people. What is the best way that we can actually scale our impact? And so it was me and Ray, a team of 2 doing everything. And so the best way that we can actually scale our impact is to hire a bigger team and really serve more people with the Grand. And so that's why we came to the decision that the best way we can do that is to raise capital. At the same time, traditionally, most people have come to the Grand as individuals. Some other folks found us just through their own journeys of wanting to get that support when they were in transition. Ultimately, what we want to do is we actually want to also help employers support their teams when they're at these pivotal role changes or milestones in their careers and their personal lives. Our belief is that if we have companies that invest and care about their people, not just for their work experience, but their human experience, then we can all benefit from that and become more resilient, have a deeper sense of belonging, connection, and all of that leads to higher performance and greater outcomes in the workplace. Now at the Grand, we are partnering with companies that care deeply about their people to really bring them to the Grand and partner with them.
Yeah, so using the capital to expand, go B2B, but also to scale that impact. Mm-hmm. What's the difference now that you've gone through it? Because before this, you were supporting founders, and after that, you were coaching them, and now you are one. So that must have been quite changing sides of the table, right? So were there any things that you didn't really realize, while you're supporting everything, but now you're a founder, you have a different eye on it or a different appreciation of?
Yeah, I would say that being close to it, working in venture and being an executive coach, I felt like I knew the reality of what it was to be a founder, the ups and the downs. And I knew that there were moments of, oh my God, we're onto something great. This is going to be huge. And moments of, oh my God, this is not going to work. What are we thinking? This is awful. I just didn't know that the rate of frequency. And so what I mean by that is that can happen in 15-minute increments several times a day. And so I think that's what really has surprised me about the journey, and something that you don't actually know it until you're in it, and then you can feel the impact of it. And so I think the biggest challenge of now being in the founder role is that emotional regulation of just knowing that what you're doing is worthy of your time and you are worthy of it, and just keeping on going, because I think that is the challenging part. When I think about what's helped me there is just awareness of that. One of the greatest gifts I got from my previous roles is that I was at the table with early stage founders and growth stage founders, ones who've made it. You'd hear their names, you'd be like, oh, they've made it. And I realized that they are also figuring it out and learning as they're going along, and they don't have it all figured out yet. And that was the greatest gift, knowing that everyone is doing the best that they can, and they too might have bouts of imposter syndrome. And so I think going in eyes wide open was really helpful. and just reminding myself not to compare my background or my behind the scenes to their highlight reels. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, yeah, it totally resonates with me as well. And I think it's nice because you summarized it, which is it is the nature of the thoughts, which is emotional regulation, but also the frequency of it because of the fact it's a new business situation, a new meeting, a new thing you haven't done before. So the frequency, or you could say the triggers of it come out multiple times.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, because a lot of people don't really know what the emotional regulation actually is or what the flavor of that thought is. And you've seen it across hundreds of founders.
Yeah.
And you've seen it yourself. So for those who don't really know that yet, because they're not yet a founder, maybe be a founder or kind of outside looking in, what is the flavor of that emotional regulation?
I think it starts with the stories that we tell ourselves. And so we might engage in this negative self-talk, like we're not good enough, or who am I to be a founder of this, or what have you. I think it's really just stopping that negative talk or that limiting belief and being able to reframe it. And so that's something that I've worked on personally, but also something that I've helped other people do. And a lot of it is bringing some of what's subconscious into consciousness. And then you're able to actually go ahead and reframe that thought. And so that's an exercise in terms of emotional regulation that I definitely recommend folks to do. And then the other thing is, talking to another founder about this the other day, is that, sometimes noticing the fear is actually a good thing because it lets us know that we're working on something that is big enough. It is worthy of our time. If we went day to day and never felt any level of fear or doubt, then maybe we're not working on things that are actually truly worth our time.
What's the downside of just suppressing it and just go rolling with it, right? Because I think that's a big one, right? It's like, just tough it out. Everybody has it. Just crush it. We're crushing it. Just tell yourself you're crushing it. Tell each other that you're crushing it. And obviously don't say that out loud, but that's very much the flavor of like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You know what I'm talking about, right? So what's the downside of that? Is it, because I think the upside for me is like, it feels good and it's easy to say at least, but how would you say some of the ways it could play out negatively?
Yeah, I actually don't believe in the fake it till you make it. Oh, like we're crushing it. Just everyone just pat each other on the back. I actually think it's the opposite that is powerful, which is sharing and practicing vulnerability. One example is when I was working with founders, I run this empathy exercise where I have them share things that are keeping them up at night, the biggest challenge that's on their plate. And I anonymize it so that everybody else can read someone else's. I have people raise their hand if what the person wrote could basically have been what they would have brought to the group. Things like, I feel like I'm everybody's cheerleader, but no one is mine. Or I feel like I've been working on this company for so long, but we're just not getting it. It's been 7 years. Or like all of these examples. And I actually think saying that out loud is what's more powerful because we're able to acknowledge it and confront it and then know that we are not alone in those feelings. And only then can we move forward and keep going. And so I think that it's not just the cheerleading, it's also the challenge. It's also the being able to confront it for ourselves and for each other. And I think one thing that comes up for me is when I think about Ray Dalio principles, there's this image of the squiggles. I don't know if you've seen that or read the book, but what's helpful about that is he talks about having audacious goals and then you might fail, but then you learn from that failure and that allows you to have even bigger, more audacious goals. As long as that squiggle or that spiral is on an upward trajectory, then you're in good shape because you're constantly learning. And so if that's the case, those failures are just points where you can actually get better in the long run.
But vulnerability is scary, right? Let's talk about vulnerability. Let's talk about empathy. It's scary, right? Nobody wants to say you're vulnerable. You and I can't imagine a founder going up to a VC and saying, hey, I'd like to share my vulnerabilities with you. So what do you have to say about that? Like that fear, you and I can talk about that word because we're comfortable with that, but it can also fall so flat in so many arenas of that conversation. So how should founders think about vulnerability and the spaces for which that can come out?
As a leader, it's important to be and to model that vulnerability because it allows your team to show up in a very authentic and real way. And what I mean by that is when you give people, I like to think of it as a social permissioning. At a baseline, we don't go there because we feel like as humans, we don't have permission to go there. And so if I had just met you, Jeremy, we would probably talk about the lowest common denominator things like the weather, where we're from, what we do for work. But if you create a space where you allow people to actually go deeper, that's when they feel comfortable sharing. And I believe that people do want to go there. They are just not given permission in a day-to-day space. And so once you're able to make it safe for people, and I do think that comes from the top, then I think people are able to really rise to the occasion. And the reason it's so important is because now, more so than ever, you see what happened with the pandemic and the state that we're in today. We need to acknowledge everyone's human experience. It can no longer just be, okay, we have our work self and we have our individual selves, our personal selves. I don't mean that we need to share all parts of ourselves always, but we need to feel comfortable that there's psychological safety, that there's no negative repercussions for really being our authentic selves and saying and sharing how we truly, truly feel. And it's hard. I will acknowledge that. It's hard. I don't think that these things change overnight, but as leaders, as empathetic leaders, I definitely think it's important to practice that. And it's a way for you to, again, build deeper connections across the firm with your teams.
Yeah, that authentic connection comes from sharing the dark times and the tough times about who and why you are, right? So I'm curious about for yourself here, have there been moments where it's been dark or tough and that you had to choose to be brave?
Yes, absolutely. I would say this period of my life is a pretty brave one. And the reason is because I'm doing two jobs that I've never done before, being a founder and CEO and being a new mom. And so I would like to sum it up with a visual. So I was 6 months pregnant. I was decided in the middle of the pandemic that we wanted to be closer to our families. And so I bought a house online. I decided to, never seen it, decided to road trip to Wisconsin, back where I grew up with my husband, was 6 months pregnant, was fundraising at the time. We ended up getting a flat tire in this road trip, and then, our tire broke. And so long story short, I was in the back of a tow truck driving to Minneapolis on investor calls, bumping along 6 months pregnant. And so when I think about being brave, it's just putting myself out there in situations where there's just a lot of uncertainty and just taking the plunge. And that's one experience that comes to mind. There are a few others, but I think that's the one that just struck me and that is close to my heart right now. And fun fact, my daughter's name is Zayla, and it actually means brave. And so I hope that she takes some of that bravery and goes forth and dives in headfirst into whatever she wants in her life.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so sweet and also a crazy story as well. Also, so many emotions. And that's a crazy visual, right? Because that is a challenge for so many founders around whether you can be a founder and can be a parent, right? And I think it takes different flavors, right? So it ranges from, I'm a founder now, and I don't know whether I can have or should have kids because I'm so busy as a founder.
Yeah.
And there's a trade-off between being a founder and then taking care of the kid. And we just all the way to the other end of the scale, which is I want to be a founder, but I also want to have kids. And I want to have kids first and then be a founder later. Or if I be a founder, I'll have kids later, right? And personally for myself, I had that same situation where I was weighing different offers to found something of my own. There was startup opportunities for me to come as a COO or turn around the business and things like that. And there was a VC role also that I eventually took up. Out of that, I was also aware that in that case, we had a baby on the way as well, right? And so that influenced how I was making a decision. So how do you think about that trade-off on your end? Like, what advice would you give to people who are weighing the founder life and having children?
Oh, that's a heavy one. That's a hard one. And I would say that the thing that helped me is just being flexible and enjoying the journey. It is so hard. I think being a founder is, again, really hard because what we talked about before, there's so many new things that you just have never done before. And at the same time, being a parent is the same thing times two because you're not sleeping and, there's so many other things that are happening. And so if you get caught up in this, again, self-talk of, am I good enough? Or am I going to be good enough? Then you might limit yourself. But the best advice I can give is if you allow yourself to enjoy the journey, to be really flexible and to really ask yourself, what it is that you want, then I think you can go for it and know that it's all worth it. And I don't think that makes it any easier, but it helps you become really clear in what you're doing it all for, and if that is really what you want.
I'm curious because you made a decision to keep going because, obviously based on chronology, you were already a founder and around there. And then along the way, you decided to continue having a family on that trajectory. And so I'm just kind of curious in that chronology, while you were in that pickup truck, a tow truck, kind of bouncing around, obviously. So I think you had one visualization at that time about what your life would be once the kid arrives, right?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's any difference between what your then conceptualization or visualization of your actual life as a new parent and a founder versus what the actual reality of that is. I'd love to hear that, if that changed or evolved as well.
Yeah, I think you can anticipate it, you can rationalize it in your head, you can read all the books, you can talk to all the people about becoming a parent. You really don't understand what it's like until you're in the thick of it because it is such a challenging, emotional, physically challenging experience as well. But at the same time, my heart is so full. And as cheesy as that sounds, something as simple as, oh, she smiled at me. It's as simple as that keeps you going. And in fact, one thing that struck me about the whole experience is that it actually helps me think about my purpose and my meaning and what I want to do and how I want to contribute to the world. And if I'm spending time away from her, I want to be doing that intentionally, working on something that I believe in and really living out my purpose. And so the grand and working on something that we put so much heart into, something that impacts so many people's lives, I can't imagine working on a better thing while being a mom as well. And so for folks out there who are contemplating, is this right for me? I think if you are really working on something that you feel really strongly and deeply connected to, it will make it all worth it. And you won't feel bad about doing both because you'll derive different sense of meaning and purpose from being a founder and being a parent. I'm curious, I want to throw the question back at you. How does it feel being a dad? Happy Father's Day, by the way. I know you're celebrating today. So how does it feel now? What is the reality like for you?
Similar to you, and I obviously done all the work and research, and I also had an added benefit of having my second startup be one in early education. And so I always like to joke and sometimes say along the way, I also invested millions of dollars of investor capital to learn what being a dad would be like by working with thousands of parents, right?
Awesome.
And so I got to see so many different like family journeys. And I think it was just a tremendous responsibility, but also joy to really help so many families, at that high level with their families and making things easy and better. It was still a little bit high level,
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is when you have your own kid, then maybe it's similar to being a VC supporting founders to being a founder yourself. It's still high level because then when you have the kid, then you're like, yeah, I don't just love all kids as a group, and I also love this group of kids as a volunteer and as a teammate and as a steward. But I also love this kid, one kid, so much. I think always in the back of my head, I always had that perspective of like trade-offs, right? Because when you do one thing, you do another thing. But I think one thing I've kind of forgot along the way is just like how much more of a, not just a joy, but also a love. Yeah, a parent would do anything for their kid. That also includes doing your job better. So there was all these artificial trade-offs that we look at. It's like, do you love your work or do you love your kid? It's so reductionist, which is that when you love your kid, I think it lets you love your job if you had a good job.
Yeah.
More because it lets you put together the family and the structure and the time for you to love your kid. There's a bit of a flywheel that it's not a zero-sum game for love, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and I thought it was nice to have a big baby version reminder every day of that love. Yeah.
No, I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, one last question I'd love to have is if you could time travel like 10 years back in time, back to when you were still in banking, right? And so in 2011, what advice would you give yourself back then if you just popped out of that time travel capsule?
Yeah. Let me think about this one. That's a good question. The advice I would give myself is that the risk of not doing something is greater than doing it and failing. I say that because, I was working in finance for a long time and I had, again, some ideas of other things that I could potentially do, but I didn't take the plunge. And there are always times that you could talk yourself out of it because it's too risky. You might not be good enough, all the things we talked about. And so if I could go back and tell my younger self that it's worth the risk, because looking back, you always are going to think, oh man, I'm too late. I should have done it sooner. And that can be really paralyzing. And so there's no better time than now to dive right in, whatever it is that you're contemplating.
Wow, that's really sweet and really thoughtful. Thank you so much, Anita. I'd love to take this time just to kind of like paraphrase the three big themes that emerged for me and I took away from this conversation. I think the first, of course, was I just love the phrase they use, transitions, because you use that phrase to describe your own career transitions from finance to business school to acting. I guess we'll save that for another time. To being in VC, to being a coach, to being a founder yourself. And so it's just interesting because I think it's a nice way to think about them not as departures but just a transition, about different chapters you mentioned. And it's also interesting because your own founder journey and the startup that you're doing now is about helping other people with their life and work transitions as well. And so I think it's a very nice poetic loop where you're helping others, where I'm sure others have helped you before in those transitions as well that you mentioned. The second thing that I really enjoyed, of course, was obviously some of the industry nerding out over venture capital and the bridge / in-between space between founders and VCs. And I think the benefits are seeing both sides, but also the tensions that can arise from there and some of the dynamics from, do I have the space or credibility to speak about this issue or help facilitate that, all the way to, hey, what is going on? And let's build this role from scratch and explore that. So I think there was a good dynamic, but overall kind of like talking about seeing that and holding that space open for hundreds of founders as on the VC side, but also as a coach. I think the third thing I really appreciated actually was the humor, I guess, to me at least, of you having worked with hundreds of founders and now you becoming a founder yourself is actually kind of mildly comedic, because here's someone who has been coaching and holding a space for others, and now you're in it yourself. And like we shared, how difficult it actually is to be in the thick of it not just from the flavor of the emotional regulation, but also from the frequency, from all the different ways you get triggered on it all the time. So it's just a really interesting dynamic around and conversation and openness about the actual vulnerability, the squiggles, the dynamics of being a new parent. And in your case, for example, fundraising while with a flat tire, get it on the back of a truck while pregnant and running a startup. So hopefully that serves all as a space and guide for other people who are thinking about similar chapters in their life as well.
Well, thank you for having me. I loved this conversation with you, and thank you for being part of the grand community and a good friend.
Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share this episode with friends and colleagues. Sign up at www.jeremyau.com to discuss this episode with other community members in our forum. Stay well and stay brave.